You know, I wasn't going to steal this, but I think I might. We call it Christian borrowing. Have you ever tried to make yourself look good? Maybe you try to make yourself look good in the mirror, or maybe you try to make yourself look good in front of others. I remember when I was a youngster and how I used to try to show off on the ball field. And it would begin with the phrase, "Hey, watch me." And generally turn out pretty disastrously. But there was a reason for that, because I was looking for self-recognition. I was looking for this idea that everybody's attention to be on me, because I needed people to be looking at me. Any of you like that? Anybody of you know someone like that? Chances are, if you don't know someone like that, you are that person. Just showing that out there. But you come out and you say, "Wow, look at what I am doing. Look at what I have done." And you become very self-oriented, don't you? Now, I want you to hold that picture in your mind. And I want you to think about the last time that you put on a sports jersey or something like that. Now, I have a hockey hat at home for my Penguins. Does that make me a hockey player? No. If I have a basketball jersey and I put it on, does that make me a basketball player? What if I put on my awesome Chicago Cubs Ryan Sandberg jersey? Does that make me a baseball player? No. What if I add cleats and a hat? What if I buy a bat? What if I have a glove? What if I buy a ball? These things do not make me what is in the heart of a person, right? They do not make me a baseball player. So if I want everybody to look at me, but yet I'm not what I profess to be, what am I? Phony, right? Phony. Today we're in week 21 of our Believe series. Can you believe it? Anyway, week 21, and we're talking about, well, when Randy Frazee put together this series, he was looking at what does the church need today? What does the church need to discover today? And he found himself saying the church needs to rediscover itself. The church needs to rediscover its primary purpose. It needs to discover what it believes and what that means. How does that shape us as people, and how does that manifest in outward action? So the last 20 weeks we've been looking at what we believe and what does that mean. So today we take a step into action as we become more and more like Christ. Today we talk about love. Now, for many of you who just started saying, what's love got to do with it? Or you give love a bad name. For my Bon Jovi fans in the house. Or love hurts. All those things can be true, can't they? All those things can happen. We start talking about love, and all of a sudden the preacher starts talking about love, and the people in the pews are going, "Oh, great, the preacher's going to talk about love again. Why can't we hear about judgment? Why can't we hear about fire and brimstone? Why can't we hear about people's feet sweating? You know, why can't we feel people's hearts starting to flutter a little bit? And the preacher's talking about love. Boring, right? Most of you are saying, amen. Amen. But here's the issue. Here's the issue. How many of you went to school once? Joe, you went twice? Okay. We'll talk about that later. So, if you were in school, and remember, think back to those days. Paul, since I already picked on you once, you're going to be my constant, just so you know. Think about back to when you go to school. It's going to take a second, Paul. Paul's got to think a little bit farther back. But anyway, he's got a good sense of humor. So, you think back to your schooling, and when the teacher says something more than once, what does that mean? It's important, right? Then you should probably remember it. Then if the well, you can't say this much anymore, but if the teacher writes it on the board, what does that... Now, the teacher said it twice, and he or she writes it on the board. What do you think that means? It's going to be on the test. It's important. Jesus talks about love almost as much as he talks about money. That means it's important. That means Jesus is saying, listen, if you get this wrong, hell and damnation and all the preaching about fire and brimstone ain't going to matter. Because that's a result of not knowing love. That is a result of not knowing what it means to love as a Christian. Now, when we looked, how many of you watched the video for Sunday school this week? Anybody watch the video this skeleton out? Only a couple of you. So you guys will recognize this. I don't usually do this, but I loved it so much. Or any phrase they use an example that I'm gonna try my best to imitate. It's the reason that he's very popular and very well known, and I'm not. Just so you know, is when we talk about love. There was a story of a couple that went to the doctor's office, and the husband had a doctor's appointment, and the husband walks out of the doctor's office after having his consult with the doctor, and the doctor calls the wife in. And says to the wife, you need to sit down, I got to talk to you. Your husband's very, very sick. He's very sick. But I think if you do what I have in mind, if you have the following suggestions, he's going to be okay. First, when he gets home from a hard day at work, don't hang him. Don't hassle him. Let him relax. Let him come home, prop his feet up, and relax for a few minutes. Secondly, when he comes home, don't tell him about your problems. Don't tell him about your hardships and struggles, because that's going to cause him extra stress. Make sure that you make a healthy and delicious meal for him for supper each day. Make sure you take the time to tell him that you love him and you embrace him. Make sure you tell him to take the time. Make sure you take the time to let him know and give him confidence, telling him he's right sometimes, telling him that all these things are positive. Bring in these positive aspects into your relationship. So the wife walks out of the doctor's office, and she gets in the car, and the husband looks at her, and he looks at his wife, and he said, well, what did the doctor have to say? And the wife looked at him with these beautiful eyes, these big eyes, and she said, you're going to die. Did I do pretty good, Taylor? When you see something good, you just have to use it. Anyway, so what does that mean? It means that love, when we talk about Christian love, it doesn't make any sense to talk about the word love and not have anything attached with it. Right? It doesn't make any sense. Love is something different. Love presents itself differently. We cannot say that we love and not do something in service. Right? If there something is active in action. But action doesn't produce love, does it? Action doesn't produce love. There has to be something different. So today we're going to be talking about Galatians chapter 5. Now, Galatians is the most amazing book in our scriptures, in my opinion. It's the first book that we know is the oldest book of the New Testament. We know for a fact that Paul is the author of this letter, and there's no evidence that any editing has ever been done to it. And when we look at this book and we read it, it's the most self-identified book by its first line. Because Paul is going to talk about love. And in the first verse, in the first chapter of this book, it starts out with this wonderful, romantic calling, this wooing, if you will. You guys want to know what the first verse says? Yeah. You foolish Galatians. Not quite sure how this works. I say we're going to get there. You foolish Galatians. This letter starts out, to give you a little bit of background, Paul spent, you can read this in Acts chapter 16, by the way. Paul spent a lot of time in Galatia. He built up a congregation. He was educating the church. And he found himself, he had to go and move on to his next venue, if you will, his next missionary opportunity. But he gets word that something has happened. In his absence, new teachers have come and taught the Galatian church a different teaching, brought them back from the gospel to practicing the covenantal laws of Judaism. And I tell you, they were very convincing. And someone says, well, how do you know, Pastor Todd, how convincing they were? Because you have to be pretty darn convincing to convince adult males to be circumcised. Amen? Amen? We can draw that conclusion. So, preaching never works out for me. I can always do stand up, right? So we find ourselves this idea of these teachers have come and they've brought this congregation, they've taken a different direction to the one. Now they're back following the covenantal laws, making these people become Jewish before they become Christian, and they perverted the law of grace. But Paul starts out with this wicked I call it a wicked backhand or a gib slap. Yeah, for all my NCIS people out there. But then he begins to reconstruct. He begins to move into, what does it mean to love? Because Christ is love, and Christ's love is different than this idea of the covenant, because Christ's love is emulated in another way. So often when people look at the gospel, when people look at Christianity, they look at it as a list of do's and don'ts, right? Right? Here's a list of what you're not allowed to do. And it usually depresses the crap out of most people, right? You can be honest, you're in church. I get this, right? So let me read for you Galatians chapter 5, beginning at verse 16. I say, be guided by the Spirit, and you won't carry out your selfish desires. A person's selfish desires are set against the Spirit, and the Spirit is set against one's selfish desires. They are opposed to each other, so you shouldn't do whatever you want to do. But if you are being led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The actions that are produced by selfish motives are obvious, since they include sexual immorality, moral corruption, doing whatever feels good, idolatry, drug use, and casting spells, hate, fighting, obsession, losing your temper, competitive opposition, conflict, selfishness, group rivalry, jealousy, drunkenness, partying. Anybody else bored already? And all the other things like that. I warn you, as I have already warned you, that those who do these kinds of things won't inherit God's kingdom. But, he goes on to say, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against things like this. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified self with its passions and its desires. If we live by the Spirit, let's follow the Spirit. Let's not become arrogant, make each other angry, or be jealous of one another. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. Paul begins to say the law prohibits. The law prohibits these kinds of things. But the Spirit, which is love, comes from something different. Where the law is restrictive, the Spirit is permissive. There is no law against gentleness, kindness, joy, peace, patience. These are all fruits of the Spirit. I grew up watching a movie that you guys may have watched one time or two. It was my dad's favorite two movies of the entire planet, and that was Grumpy Old Men. Now, Grumpy Old Men, for those of you who, it sounds like most of you know what I'm talking about, is a film on how to be good neighbors, right? Yeah. Right? It talks about generosity, it talks about patience and love and virtue. And these neighbors practice that on each other every day, right? Now, chances are, if you haven't seen Grumpy Old Men, first off, there's a little bit of a language issue for me, but it is a funny movie. But these two neighbors, played by Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, are constantly trying to sabotage one another. They're constantly trying to trip one another up. They're constantly trying to play jokes, or not jokes, but I think sometimes they're actually trying to end one another. My personal opinion. But fortunately, the movie works out otherwise, or else it'd be a really grotesque movie. Anyway. But really, this movie shows us how not to neighbor, how to not love your neighbors. When we talk about what we're allowed to do instead of what we're not allowed to do, there is a permission giving there. But it has to start with something different. Love cannot be learned. Love has to be received, right? Love cannot be learned. It has to be received. Now, when I talk about love, I'm talking about the gospel. I'm talking about the Spirit of Christ. Action does not affect inward change. Inward change affects external actions. Love needs to be lived out. Where the law constrains, love permits. We find ourselves in this idea of love and service. Galatians, a couple of chapters before where we just read, you'll hear that Paul says, the Christian message can be summed up in love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. That means that love is a fruit. Love is evidence. Love is the result of an inward change. An external sign of an inward grace. Right? An external sign of an inward grace. Love is that grace. Love is not an obligation. It can't be something that is forced, right? To do something nice for someone, how about this? We'll go back to a little bit of our self-exalting, if you will. I used to work with a guy that always volunteered to work overtime. He was the first one to do it. He's the first one to work overtime, the first one to go above and beyond the call of duty. But you know what he looked really good to administration, right? But you know what he did whenever I was working alongside him? Complained the whole time how he didn't want to be there. And I asked him one day, dude, why did you volunteer to do this? And he's like, duh, it looks good to the boss. So often we go through the actions to make us look good, but if we don't have the inward change, that inward transformation of love, what we do doesn't matter. We're hollow shells. We're whitewashed tombs. We're going through the motions. We're doing something we have no passion for. Love is passion. Christians love because they respond in love. We love because we are loved. Christians love because we are loved. To be a Christian, to be a person that professes Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, means that we do things out of love, not out of self-satisfaction, not out of self-glory. We behave in a different way. We are called to do things differently because we are different. The big thing that caused Methodism, the United Methodist Church didn't exist early on. It was just called the Methodist Church, which was actually part of the Church of England. Congratulations, you're all Anglicans. But the Methodist Church rose out of this thirst that religion, see, even in Wesley's time, religion ended in ritual. But with Methodism, with Wesley said, wait a second, we live into God's love the way Paul tells us to. We live into God's love. Ritual is just the beginning of what we believe. It cannot end. Methodists, Christians are called. Now, I'm not saying that other Christians do not do this, but I'm saying it's something very specific and near to our hearts as Methodists, to live into love, to loving our neighbor as ourselves. Something we're called especially to do. Wesley found it very important to actually get into what are called our general rules. To do good, to do no harm, and to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. To do good. To do good is to love your neighbor as yourself. To find yourself in this point, we have to ask ourselves, what has taken place, what has transpired. Love. Love is what transpires. In love, the Christian is free from the burden of selfishness. This is the freedom that Paul talks about. When we receive that love, when we receive Christ, we're not motivated by the same things that we once were. We are not motivated from self. We are relieved from the burden of selfishness. Think of how you make decisions. How many of you have ever made a decision? Husbands, you can't put your hands up. You don't get to do that. So, ever made a decision? Yeah? Without permission? With permission? Okay, good. It's always good to have permission, husbands, before you make a decision. Just going to throw that out there. Marriage Counseling 101. I need you to ask the question, if a man is in the woods and a woman is not around to hear it, is he still right? So, the answer is always no. Now, if a woman tells the man he's right, is he right? No, she's being graceful. So, on that note, how do we make decisions? Why do we do what we do? Well, chances are we're saying there's a level of self-interest involved in our decisions, right? There's a level of, how does this affect me? Think about, do you guys ever pass a car on the long side of the road, broke down with a flat tire, hood up? Why just keep going? Well, chances are I had somewhere to be. I had a schedule to keep, right? Or maybe I don't know what they need. Or two, I'm uncomfortable with the situation, right? There's a level of self within us dictating our actions, dictating our responses. But Paul says, when you are in the Spirit, when you are living a life that is love, when you have an indwelling of Christ within you, it's no longer about you. Christians are called to service, to love in a different way. We love each other by putting ourselves on the back burner. Love is not something you do. Love is who we are. It's a state of being. Now, there's a great group of philosophers that get together and they talk about this idea of being. And being is another way of talking about how we exist. You know, what does it mean to be something? To be in existence. And poor things, they had nothing else to study. But they decided to study that. So I took that idea of existentialism, which is what it's called, and I looked at it and I thought to myself, love is a state of being. Love is not what we do. Love is who we are. The L word is an action word. It's a verb. Love is freedom expressed through service. Love is freedom expressed through service. We have the freedom of Christ because of the cross, releasing us from our burden of sin, releasing us from our burden of selfishness, so that we are free to express the love that we have been given through service to others. It reflects an inward change, an outward sign of an inward transformation. Evangelicals believed, which is what caused the evangelical movement to just explode, was that you cannot encounter God and remain the same. You cannot encounter God and remain the same. There is a transformation or a rebirth that takes place when you live a life of love. And that means that the person that knew you yesterday, before you knew Christ, cannot recognize you because you are so different because of the radical love of God in your life. You cannot remain unchanged when you encounter God. And as Methodists particularly, we believe that each day you are different. Each day as you live into faith, you are living closer and closer to Christ because that is our goal. Our goal is not to be who we are. Our goal is to be Christ. To be Christ to the world. So that when someone sees us, they don't see who we are. They see Jesus. Jesus tells his disciples, they'll know you're Christians by your... It's an old hymn out of Scripture. They'll know you are Christians by how you love. They will know that you are different by the way you behave. Not by the things that you don't do, but by the things that you do. How you talk to others. How you treat others. How you go out of your way for others. How you live your life in service reflects love. An inward change, a transformation of God that can only come through our reception of faith. To be different because we are different. We are to be different because we are different. Love is to be outwardly expressed, not inwardly consumed. We live not for love of ourselves, not for love of our own egos. I know, I have a hard time with that sometimes. Autumn will tell you. Autumn will tell you that the biggest problem I have is my humility. Because I'll tell you, I just thank God I'm a humble person. I just thank God that He has bathed me in humility, and I know that within me that God is going to do amazing things because I'm so humble.
You are in church, you know.
I am in church. I'm behind the pulpit too. Actually, more to the side. But here's this idea of we are not inwardly focused. I do not exist to feed my own appetite. I do not exist to feed my own desires and wants. I exist to serve others in love. That creates the Christian community. That's what makes the church so different from anything else. It's not about what I want. It's about me showing love and service to you when you are in need, when you need strength, when you need courage, when you need hope and healing. I am going to be there for you. The church is going to be there for you. Your church family is going to be there for you. But too often, we act like grumpy old men around the church. We don't want bothered with someone else. Or we're too busy talking about someone else or hurting someone else. We don't realize that we are called to live differently, that we have been transformed by God's love. Paul tells us there in verse 23, the fruit of the Spirit. The evidence of the Spirit is to live differently and to love. We love differently because we are different. Love is to be outwardly expressed, not inwardly consumed. External action does not reflect internal change. Do you have the love of Christ abiding in you? Do you believe that God has been encountered in you? Do you believe a transformation has taken place within yourselves? If not, then seek it. Pray for it. We cannot encounter God and remain the same. Because we are called to be Jesus to the world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son,